I will. Take it easy. Make sure my phone's on. Hello. Nice to see you all. I'm Tom Katsalamidas. I'm one of the commissioners, and it's great to have everybody here at the 2015 Idaho State Tax Commission annual meeting. Just for the record, this is a public meeting because we've got myself here, and we've got Commissioner Elliott Work here, and Ken Roberts, Commissioner Roberts are here. So it forms a quorum, so we have to have a public meeting, and that's what this is. But anyway, I want to welcome you all here, and our chairman, Rich Jackson, is at a multi-state tax commission meeting, so he won't be with us, and he's out there trying to find out what's going on with a bunch of things like conformity and sales tax and streamline and a bunch of things that are involving multi-states. So that's where he is. I also would like to real quickly recognize our executive leadership team, and if you would all stand up and just raise your hand and show who you are. These are the folks that really run the tax commission. They take care of all the daily operations, and we appreciate all the work they do. They do a great job for all of us, and we appreciate it. Also, I would like to recognize all of the legislators that are here, and there are a lot of them, and I don't want to miss anybody, so if you just raise your hand or stand up, whatever you'd like to do, it'd be great. I would like to recognize our chairman, Chairman Collins, who's here, and he made the ultimate effort and got here after 3 weeks of knee surgery. He just had a knee replacement, and that's pretty commendable to show up here on a day that only involves taxes. That shows how dedicated you are. You got to be dedicated to come to something like this if you have knee surgery 3 weeks ago and you're here for taxes. Also, I wanted to recognize our state comptroller, Brandon Wolf. Brandon, nice to see you. Good to see you here. And so I think that's everybody. And we do have representatives from the county assessors. Former and present chairman of the assessors organization, or president. Is it president or chairman? Vice President. They're here, and they're representing all the county assessors from throughout the state of Idaho, and so we appreciate them being here. They're going to take back some good information at the assessors meeting on how well we're treating them, aren't you? Okay. Let me run through real quickly our agenda for today, and mostly you'll see that it's going to be involving customer service for the most part. And so the first item of business will be customer service, and Elliot will be covering that. And then we're going to have the impact of fraud and how the fraud situation is being handled in the state of Idaho. And luckily we have a national figure here, Doreen Warren, who is really a national figure in trying to solve this problem, not just for Idaho, but for the rest of the United States. He's on several national committees and doing a great job. And then there's the customer service, again, plans that we're going to implement. And then we'll take a quick 10-minute break, and you can go outside and off to the left there and into the cafeteria, and we'll have some refreshments, and they're provided by the CPAs for the state of Idaho, and so we appreciate that very much. And then right after that, we'll start in with a panel discussion and talk about how we can improve customer service, or how we haven't had as good a customer service as we might have, and what we can do to improve. And then we will have questions and answers right after that. And we'll have some folks here that will pick up written questions, and you can come up here and talk into the mic and give us your question right there or on the written form. And this agenda and this annual meeting is being streamed on public television, so just so you all know. One other thing, because this is a public meeting, if you would, when you get some time here, if you could sign in at the back of the back desk and just let us know who you are and where you represent, that would be helpful for our administrative assistant to know. Okay, our mission and vision, just to start things off and top it off, is to administer the state tax laws in a fair, timely, and cost-effective manner to benefit all the citizens of Idaho. Okay, and our vision, the Tax Commission will inspire public confidence through innovative service delivery, courteous professional conduct, effective education, and fairness in tax administration. So that is our mission and that is our vision. That's what our charge is, and that's what we try to accomplish every day. So at this time, unless there are some questions, anybody want to add anything to the agenda, because it is a public hearing, this is your time. Thank you, that's great. Okay, at any rate, I'd like to call up Commissioner Elliott Work, and he will tell us a little bit more in depth about customer service. Elliott?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. How is everybody? I'm Elliott Work. I am the newest commissioner here at the commission. I've been here just about long enough to have a baby. And in my time as a commissioner, my short time, I have found that there are basically two different types of people that don't like to pay taxes: males and females. You'll get warmed up, don't worry. I'm going to talk a bit about customer service today. So this diagram helps to illustrate what the Tax Commission really is. We are a customer service organization. Everything that we do at the Tax Commission has to do with serving customers. That is what we do. Not only do we serve the individual taxpayers, we serve businesses, and not only do we collect taxes from businesses, but we educate businesses. We help them to do business. And you'll see some things that we've been doing. We help the legislature, we serve local government, and we actually have customer service internal. Our employees need to speak to each other and be effective at working together. I'll tell you that since I've been to the commission, I'm surprised at the breadth and the depth of the amount of different kinds of services that we do. It's pretty incredible what we managed to accomplish with really a very small amount of agency personnel. At the Tax Commission, we are continually improving our culture of customer service. It's very important for us to continually improve. And it's very important that every time we serve a customer that we do an outstanding job. Now, there are times when we fall short of our own standard, but our standard is excellence every day in every interaction with the customer. And in the security environment that we find ourselves in, and I'm sure that most of you have been watching enough news to know that data breaches and identity theft have become endemic out there. Our job is to make sure that we protect taxpayer information, and so security really is customer service for the Tax Commission. Here are some statistics that indicate some of the things that the Tax Commission does. As I mentioned, we provide a wide variety of services, processing returns, bringing in payments, license applications, issuing refunds, educating the public, and working with the business community to help them do business in the state of Idaho. I'll relate a little story. I was in our Pocatello office one day, and we had people in the Pocatello office that were actually helping a business to do their sales tax report for the month. And I asked about it later, and they said, well, these people have a difficult time, and we know that it's better for us if we just bring them in every month and help them out. Now, I'm not saying come into our Tax Commission offices and do your tax returns with us. I'm just saying that we will go the extra mile when that is what's needed. You can see that we take a lot of phone calls. I think it's about 110,000 phone calls a year. And we'll talk about ways that we're trying to reduce that call volume, or at least keep it steady as the population of the state grows. We process over 2.4 million different transactions. That's a lot of transactions. A lot of refunds that go out the door. And we'll talk a little bit more about the fraudulent returns that we've held back and not paid out, 1,170 of those so far, more than $1.7 million. I will say we consider it our moral obligation to not ever send out a dime of taxpayer funds to criminals out there that are trying to defraud the state. One of the things that's important to the Commission that we think is important for the public is their rights, for the public to understand their rights. We've consolidated those rights into some documents. We have them online at our website for people to find. They're hopefully easy to understand, and we transmit these whenever we're dealing with our customers in terms of audits or collections or appeals. We want to make sure that our customers understand exactly what their rights are. We have a taxpayer bill of rights that looks like this, and I'll just pick out a few of the ones that I think are really important. One is the right to be informed. The reality is that if you're being audited, you might not like the ultimate outcome, right? I mean, it's possible. It's possible that you will like it. Sometimes it goes either way. But what I think the Commission really want is for the taxpayer to understand what's happening, understand why it's happening, when it's happening, and when they get done with the process, to feel like they've been respected and informed during the process. Again, you might not like the ultimate outcome, but we want you to feel, the customer to feel like they are respected by us. And of course, on the bottom, there's the taxpayers having the right to pay only the tax that they owe. Now, we have something really exciting we've done this year, is we have created, after 15 years of work and dreaming about it, we've created an online portal for taxpayers called TAP, Taxpayer Access Point. It's been highly successful. Almost 70,000 accounts have been created just in the first 10 months. And the nice thing about TAP, because we can do so many things electronically and online now as taxpayers, is that it lessens the work for taxpayers and commission staff. So it's basically a win-win out there in the community. Here are just a few of the services we offer: e-filing, electronic payments. You can request a payment agreement if you owe some money to the tax commission. We can get payment agreements going online, which I think is a really good service for taxpayers. In addition, you can see that you can, for instance, print copies of your filed returns. Sometimes that's a really good help to the customers. So those practices help to streamline what we do in-house, so minimize the effort that we need to put in on some of these areas so that we can focus on other areas, and also help the taxpayer as well. So again, like I said, it's a real win-win. But security is very important to us, and the Taxpayer Access Point has a lot of different levels of security that you'll find. It means that we will verify taxpayers as they get deeper into TAP, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But first, two-factor authentication. Basically, you can sign in, you can create an account, get a password, but we're going to contact you in some different manner, an email or a text message for a PIN to have you come back and sign back in to verify, yes, this is indeed the taxpayer that's talking to us. It's very important, and all of our security standards meet or exceed all the federal standards required for the TAP system. Now, we require strong passwords on TAP, but there was one time, it's really interesting, that we discovered someone had set up a very complex password. And it confused us because the password was actually Minnie, Mickey, Pluto, Huey, Dewey, Louie, Donald, and Boise. And so we actually, because we were so confused by it, we contacted the taxpayer to find out what was going on. And the taxpayer said, well, you require 7 characters and a capital. Okay. It didn't. There you go. See, you're getting warm now. Actually, it didn't happen, but we require very strong passwords. We also mask sensitive information on the screen for 2 different reasons. One, if somebody's looking over your shoulder, we don't want to be able to get your sensitive information that's not required for you on that screen. The other thing is, we want to make sure that we minimize the amount of information in case somebody does inappropriately get into an account. And we have verification letters for different reasons. For instance, when you first sign up for TAP, you'll get a verification letter to your mailing address that says, hey, great to have you on board. And by the way, if you didn't sign up for this account, why don't you give us a call? Because we want to make sure that we have the appropriate people getting into their accounts and setting up accounts. And as you get deeper into the TAP system and you get access to more and more information, we ratchet up our security procedures because we want to indeed make sure that any third party or any taxpayer or person that's getting into this information is indeed the appropriate person. Security is indeed customer service tax commission. And for any legislators out there, I want you to understand that as the security environment gets more and more difficult out there with more and more identity theft, more and more data breaches, more and more collection of data from Facebook and LinkedIn and all that, we're getting stricter and stricter in terms of our requirements for taxpayers to verify themselves. So if you call us on the telephone, we are going to require verification. Now, we will do this nicely, but there are going to be times if a taxpayer cannot provide information to us that we will say no to them, because our obligation is to not provide any information to anybody but the taxpayer or an authorized third party. So you may see us say a few more no's this year, and you may have your constituents contact you. Please understand that we're doing this to protect everybody's data. Another great thing, a couple of years ago, the legislature allowed us to update our processing software. That software now has encryption at rest for all of the data within it. The Gentax system does. That's a great security feature. We've also added active monitoring to our databases so that if there's something going on within databases, we can either stop it from occurring or certainly find out very quickly that something is going on that we don't want going on. We're also a full participant on the Governor's Cybersecurity Task Force, which is extremely valuable, and we really thank the Governor for having the foresight to set this up. Great first step to make sure that we protect the computer systems and data of our citizens. And I'm going to hand it off to Doreen Warren to discuss the impact of fraud on commission operations. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Commissioner Work, and good afternoon. I will tell you I don't have any jokes, so I apologize for that before we even get started. So we're going to talk for the next couple minutes about fraud and the impact it has on the customer service at the Tax Commission. Oops, and I just shut us off. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that we do have fraud. And the criminals have become very aggressive, sophisticated, and persistent. Historically, we found that tax returns would come in and the fraudulent returns would pretty much stop around the due date of April 15th. That stopped a couple years ago. Returns are coming in all year long, and those fraudulent returns are coming in all year long. This last year, we identified 9,000 suspicious returns. So we had to look at those returns and try to identify those 1,100 fraudulent returns that Commissioner Work mentioned earlier. So it takes a lot of resources to find those. So nationally, you'll hear the term identity theft, tax refund fraud. That's refund fraud as a whole. In Idaho, we've broken it down into two categories. So we have the traditional fraud, where the criminal uses the stolen ID but does not have an Idaho taxpayer. So there's no Idaho victim in traditional fraud. It could also include falsified or fake W-2s coming in as well. This last year, we identified 618 traditional fraud returns. And last year, it was 897, so we had a slight decrease. The identity theft, and identity theft involves an Idaho victim. So someone files looking like Commissioner Work, and the fraudsters are good. They know Commissioner Works, Elliot. They know his name, his spouse, his address. They know they can look just like him. So it takes us to go through our different efforts to identify the real Commissioner Work and his return. So with those returns, we identified 552 this last year and 219 the year before. We're seeing a significant increase in that identity theft. And also with the increase in identity theft and tax fraud, we're seeing an impact on the level of customer service that we can provide. The agency, like I mentioned, has had to shift resources to deal with those issues. But we have been building resources, so we want to help the taxpayer out there who is a victim of identity theft. So in order to provide that assistance, we developed a website. So if you go out to our website at tax.idaho.gov, even under Quick Picks, so we want to make it as visible as possible, under Quick Picks you identify identity theft information, there's a link that'll take you out to our website. On that website, it talks the taxpayer through the process to file their returns. We do mirror the IRS process. We require the federal form 14039, so those steps are out there to help the taxpayer. There's also resources available such as IRS publications and the Boise Police Department resources as well. We even provide a checklist of things that you need to consider if you are a victim of identity theft, whether you need to inform the Social Security Administration, the Better Business Bureau may be interested if there's some schemes going on locally. One of the main messages we have also for victims of identity theft, once we know that you are a victim, we are going to make sure that when you file your return, that it's your return that we actually process. So it will take a little extra time. So as I mentioned, the increase in fraud prevention efforts affected more returns than just those 9,000 that we flagged as suspicious. We had to shift resources from the normal processing to work those 9,000 cases, and it did have an impact on the services we provide. I usually come out and say, you know what, I'm going to pay refunds. If you file electronically, I'm going to pay refunds within 7 weeks. And I said that as a global statement. Paper returns, 10 weeks. I found that I was able to do that, or the agency was able to do that 92% of the time. But what we found is that the resources that were used to process these suspicious returns were the same resources required to process our part year and non-resident returns. So the 9,000 returns that we received for the Form 43, it took approximately 10 weeks to process those returns, even if it was filed electronically. And like I said, my goal is 7 weeks. We received 14,000 amended returns last year as well. We like to say that we'll process those within 4 months. Well, this year it was taking 6 months and sometimes even longer. And I know our practitioner community has informed me of that quite verbally, and I appreciate it, but it is what it is. We tried to get those processed as quickly as we could. Also, I had a backlog, the agency had a backlog of 30,000 returns on July 1st. Typically, what we try to accomplish is to get the processing returns that were received by the due date completed and posted and done by July 1st. But I had 30,000 returns still in my work queue that needed to be worked. What the impact on that is the fact that I have to have tax drive temporary employees on staff to help me work through that backlog. So now my budget's impacted because it's cost us another $100,000 this year just to work through that backlog. Also, a lot of these returns, they're not refund returns. So you say, well, what's the impact on that? If it's a tax due return and if the taxpayer has not made the payment, then our collection activity is delayed. So there is an impact on the customer service. There's also approximately 2,000 non-filer cases that were not worked because of the shift of resources in our audit division, and that came at a cost of a potentially $4 million. Now, it may sound like a lot of doom and gloom, but like I said, I was approximately 92% successful at processing returns within the 7 weeks. We were 99% successful of processing refund returns without paying interest. The best goal on that and the biggest accomplishment is the fact, and we're very proud of the fact, that the refunds were paid to the right taxpayers. Another thing to keep in mind is that we review 20% of the returns coming in if the returns are coming in electronically, which means that 80% of our taxpayers who do file electronically receive their refunds within approximately 2 weeks. So we're trying to maintain at least that customer service level. Commissioner Work mentioned the data breaches, and if you've been listening to the news in the last week, there's approximately 21 million taxpayers impacted by the recent Office of Personnel Management data breach. Those are all impacting our upcoming processing season. So what are we doing for this year? We're using the tools that the legislature appropriated money for us to implement, and that tool is allowing us, we hope, to look at all the returns coming in using more data. We're getting third-party data and more internal data that we can use to perform our analytics to try to reduce the number of false positives of the returns that are coming in. But we don't know how many returns are going to come in from the fraudsters. So the other tools that we're implementing this year to try to help us reduce our workload is we're implementing some letters. So we're going to have the taxpayers help us resolve some of these false positive issues. So there's two types of letters we can send out. One, if we're pretty sure that Robin is filing a return, we think it's her, but we just want that extra confirmation that she actually sent that return in, we're going to send her a letter. We're going to say, Robin, we just want to confirm we received this return. Please go to our website and enter this PIN that's included on this letter. All she has to do is simply go to our website, to our TAP site, and enter that PIN. Once she enters that PIN, that return will go ahead and continue processing through our system. In another situation, we may not be quite sure that Robin's identity is truly Robin. You know, there's other factors that just makes it really kind of questionable. We're going to send her a different letter. This letter is going to ask her to go take a quiz. So she's going to be invited to go to our website and answer 4 or 5 questions. Now these should be out-of-pocket questions, which should only be able to be answered by Robin, because we don't want the criminals out there through social media or other means being able to answer these questions. So she'll go out, answer those questions, and if she answers them all correctly, her return will go ahead and continue processing through the flow. If for whatever reason she's unable to complete the quiz or answer the questions correctly, or is unable to go out to our website, there's also an opportunity to provide us physical copies of the information that we need to validate the ID. She can go ahead and send that to us or drop it off at a field office. And Commissioner Katsilometes mentioned the fact that Idaho has been involved in the national effort. It's called the Security Summit, trying to work out ways that we can detect and prevent fraud nationally. And since March of this year, the collaboration effort between the states and industry, when I say industry, I'm talking about software developers and financial institutions and the IRS. We've gotten all together and have developed requirements for customer authentication and information sharing. So we're really trying to work together to try to fight this battle. So the effort to detect and prevent fraud consistently throughout the nation has the goal to maintain the integrity of the tax processing system, because it really relies on a solid system. So nationally, the message is that a secure tax system takes parties working together. Not only the states, the industry, and the IRS, but taxpayers as well. We all have a role to play in the fraud detection and prevention effort. So what Idaho is going to do, we're going to take that national message and we're going to create our own. So you'll be seeing hopefully a lot of media coverage of the fact that, you know, we are in this together. We want to get the message out to taxpayers to expect these letters. So we're going to be creating some letters or some videos that'll be out on our website. And we're going to try to get some speakers who will do those videos that will have some name recognition so we can get the coverage. So we really are trying to get the word out that this is a legitimate process and we are trying to maintain the security of taxpayer information. So I appreciate your time as we covered this ever-evolving topic, and I'll go ahead and turn the podium over to Commissioner Roberts.
Well, thank you for your attendance today, and I want to shift gears for just a moment, and I want to spend a few moments talking with you about some of the customer service plans that the Idaho State Tax Commission will be pursuing and working on over the course of the next 12 months. Commissioner Work spent some time visiting with you about some of the review of some of the efforts that we've done in customer service in the last 12 months. And Doreen Warren, as you've just heard, talked with you about some of the efforts to fight against fraud and identity theft, and what's going on both here in Idaho and on a national level. We are charged as the Tax Commission of administering the tax laws in a very dynamic world in which we live. I don't think anybody is unaware of that. But in light of all that, it's important that we remember as the Tax Commission that we work for the citizens, the taxpayers, and the businesses of Idaho. So one of the ways that we're going to do that is we're going to start using and continue to use data-driven or data-informed decision-making process that we've started this last year, and we're excited about some of the opportunities about how we develop some of the data to be used. So what are data-informed decisions? For instance, why does the telephone ring 110,000 times at the Idaho State Tax Commission every year? We should know that. What are the most common types of phone calls that are relayed through our phone system? Is it, where's my refund? Is it, I'm having problems getting the money together and it's a collections issue? So we're starting to track those calls, and we're going to start to work in an efficient manner with the staff that we have to answer those calls. Or it may be an example of issues of noncompliance found in audits. What are some of the most common themes or common areas where a taxpayer has noncompliance in the law? What shows up in an audit finding? We ought to be finding out what those common issues are, and then we need to ask the questions, what are we going to do about it? What is the State Tax Commission going to do about these errors or these phone calls? So it may help us shape decisions in regard to resources. In other words, how are we going to meet the needs of the Idaho citizens and businesses? Maybe it'll involve moving some of our resources from one part of our agency to another to help meet those. Maybe it's going to help drive communications. Not maybe, it will drive communications. Boy, it'll answer the questions of what we are to say and to whom. So maybe it's a certain industry that is not having success in complying with a certain segment of investment tax credit or some other issue. That's where we can reach out to that industry and say, this is an example of how this should be handled, and educate taxpayers. Maybe it's in the area of laws and rules. Some of the common audit findings may point out that we need to modernize and keep pace with the businesses and technology that is so rapidly changing in America. Remember that our property tax had its foundation in the 1890s. Our income tax had its foundation in the 1933, and sales and use tax had its foundation back in 1965. A question to ponder is, does the economy today in 2015, almost 16, look the same way it did back then? I would not hesitate to say it does not. Another way we can use data is to change the way our forms look and in the instructions read. Are they clear? Are they easy to fill out? Or we're looking for processing errors. Where does the taxpayer commonly make an error? So we're going to try to start tracking those errors so that it becomes a more streamlined process. All of this has two effects, both internally and externally. Internally, it will provide efficiency. Externally, it will provide an effective tax system for taxpayers to follow, for we are all taxpayers. To accomplish the ultimate goal of education and ultimately voluntary compliance. So what would be a perfect day or a perfect year in the State Tax Commission? No phone calls, no processing mistakes, and no audit findings. That would be a perfect day at the State Tax Commission. The next slide we're going to talk about is how we're going to address those needs. And these are some of the budget requests that we've submitted this year in our budget, fall into three major categories. But before I start on those three categories, I think it's important to remember a couple key things about Idaho. One is our population continues to grow. We are now over approximately 1.7 million people live in the state of Idaho. We serve approximately 800,000 individual income tax returns a year. That's 800,000. Sometimes those returns are 1 or 2 pages long, and sometimes they're thousands of pages long. Thousands. And I think a few of you may have seen the picture a couple of years ago where one return stacked flat reached from the floor to the ceiling, and we had to scan every page of that. That was one return. That was one of 800,000. Businesses, the 60,000, they'll have individual, or not individual, but business returns. And if they're a business that requires a sales and use tax permit, they have that as well, and they report monthly. So you multiply those businesses by 12 for sales tax returns. So those all create increased demands at the Idaho State Tax Commission. So the first area deals with our software. It deals with GenTax. That's the name of our software that we use for processing our returns. It's really important, I think, and I'll illustrate this for you, and if your personal computer, if you have a personal computer at home, you occasionally get an upgrade from your software provider. And it's important to download those upgrades. We need to do the same thing at the Tax Commission. It's also important at another level of upgrade to deal with the current version. If you're still working on Windows 3, 5, I don't know how old some of them are, and not on the current version, you're not getting the tools that are efficient today. So all this equates into two things. One is security upgrades. We need the security upgrades. If you haven't got anything else today, security, data breaching, and all of those things are very important. It's a big deal. And it's also important that we keep up with national standards. The second area deals with a couple positions, 8 to be we've requested. 6 of them are going to be dealing with that fraud and identity theft issue. We've pulled resources from other areas of our operation and focused on that because we think it's important that, number one, Idaho does not become a playground for criminals. We think it's really important that when a criminal tries to log in Idaho, they know that we've been doing business and we have our A game on. Doreen mentioned it just briefly, and I had it pulled up on my iPad, but today, one of the local news stations ran a story, and I don't know how many of you have read it today, but the Better Business Bureau issued a press release that the Office of Personnel Management from the federal government had a breach of 21 million records. It's real. In fact, since January 1st of this year, there's been over 150 million Americans' data compromised in one form or one fashion or another. I know from some of you sitting in this room that some of you have had that personal identity theft happen to you this year, and I'm not going to point you out, but I know you're sitting in the room today. What kind of data was stolen in that? Social security numbers, date of birth, addresses. You think somebody could fill out and steal your identity with that information? You bet they can. We think it's important to keep up a good, strong front for identity theft. The other two positions deal with the tax policy administration. It deals in the appeals area. We think it's important to, when a taxpayer has an appeal, to get an answer back to them timely. And with that, with the increased amount of population and processing, we likewise have an increase in the number of appeals. And the third and final area deals with a fraud detection tool. It requests ongoing funding, which we are incredibly thankful that the legislature funded last year on a one-year basis, but it's important that we keep that funding going. Our top legislative priority this year deals with the early passage of the annual conformity bill. Why is this important? It's important so that the Idaho citizens can get their taxes filed in a timely fashion which will expedite their refund that is due and payable to them. We process over 500,000 refunds in the tune of about $300 million. That's money that's due and payable to Idaho citizens, and we want to get it back to them in an expeditious way. So that conformity bill, because Idaho doesn't have its own income tax code, we rely on the adjusted gross income, or in other words, the bottom line of your federal form. That's our starting point. Well, in summary today, we've talked about taxpayer rights from Commissioner Work and the TAP, the taxpayer access point, and how we're trying to meet those needs and the level of customer service. Doreen's talked with you about fraud detection and prevention. I've visited with you for a moment about data and the informed decisions that we want to make as a tax commission to work efficiently. And I've talked with you for a moment about some of our budget requests. All of this information and additional can be found in the annual report, of which you have a copy of. If you haven't, there are some on the back table that will be made available to you, or they're available at the Tax Commission, and they'll also will be made available online. So that's some additional reading material if you'd like. Commissioner Castellmetti's talked about the questions. If you've come up with a question while you've heard us this first part of the presentation, write that down, bring it up during the break. Or if you'd like to ask a question live when we have the panel in the second part of our program, this mic will be turned around and available for you to ask that question. I look forward to the portion of our meeting today that will be coming up later. It's a panel. It will be moderated by Steve Fiskus, who is our property tax manager. We're going to talk about customer service, and we've invited a panel of some elected officials and also a representative from the CPA community to join us as we talk about customer service. At this point in time, I want to thank the Idaho Association, or the Society of Idaho Association or Society of CPAs for their providing the refreshment break for us, which is down in the cafeteria, and that will be down there for you to consume. However, before you all bolt for the door for the refreshments, this is a annual meeting, as Tom talked about, and I do need to recess the meeting for 10 minutes. If you could be back promptly in about 10 minutes, we'll start that panel discussion. So thank you for your time. We'll see you shortly.
Where's the,
Perfect.
am I using this? You mean we're, if we pop back up here in 1 minute, we're back on.
I'll ask you the question in the same order I introduce you. So you will be first, but I'll introduce everyone first and then.
It's okay. Okay, you ready, Doreen?
The red cards will mean 30 seconds.
Okay, let's go ahead and reconvene, and we appreciate you coming back. It's always nice to have folks come back when they're involving taxes, and we had to hurry and roll through this, or we could have given you a little more time, but this is being streamed, and Renee informs me, but they're going to cut us off here in about a half hour, so we get started. I did want to recognize Bob Aldridge here. He's one of the deans of state taxing in the state of Idaho. And he just informed me that he just turned 70 and he's out playing ice hockey again today. So give him a lot of credit too for showing up here. So at this time I did want to introduce Steve Fiskus, the manager of the Property Tax Division for the State Tax Commission. And Steve will go ahead and start off and introduce the panel and be the moderator for the panel for the customer service area on for the questions and comments. Steve, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Again, thank you to the Idaho Society of CPAs for the refreshments. Those cookies had a little surprise in them. I was glad that I was prepared so that it didn't end up on the front of my white shirt. But otherwise, again, be thinking of your questions that you may have for the panel or any of the presenters that have already spoken. Again, there are cards, or you can come up to the microphone once we finish this. Seated on the panel today are Representative Robert Anderst, currently serving in his second term representing District 12. The representative serves on several committees, including Revenue and Taxation. Senator Dan Johnson, currently in his third term representing District 6. Senator Johnson is also on several committees and serves as the vice chair of the local government and taxation committees. You may see a theme there. Tanya Nyman is a local certified public accountant, and she serves on the board of the Idaho Society of CPAs. Tax Commissioner Ken Roberts is in his third year of his term as a commissioner and is a former state representative. And Tax Commissioner Elliott Work is in his first year of his term after serving in the state Senate. So why is the panel here? Well, the format that each of you panelists will have is an opportunity to respond to a question. You'll have approximately 2 minutes to respond. If a panel member has a question of another panel member because of something that you bring up, after their response, you'll each have 1 minute to do a response, or excuse me, the question and response. So when Commissioner Work was making his presentation, he stated that security is customer service. So if security is customer service and customer service is security, is there a balance so that both can be great? If we're too strict with our security at the Tax Commission, is that bad customer service? Or if it's too easy for someone to gather information on a taxpayer's account, the TAP account, is that good customer service? What kind of customer service would you like to see from the State Tax Commission? Representative Anderst?
Well, thank you. Just to get started here, I'm here for one reason, and that's because the tax commissioner called me and said, we'd like you to come to be on a panel to come talk about taxes and talk about customer service. So, I'm happy to do that. As it relates to the question, I don't know if you can say security is customer service. I think today security is embedded in the basics. Customer service, to me, implies going a bit beyond. And so for that reason, I don't know that I would link them together as equals. But there's no doubt that security plays an enormous role, especially with the data that's collected from the Tax Commission. I wasn't too sure on the format here if we're going to have multiple rounds or what, but anecdotally, I'll just say when the commissioner was talking earlier about individuals that have been through this problem personally, I'm one of the ones that he's talking about. And so I can tell you that I was enormously surprised and also happy to find out that it was caught ahead of the fraud taking place. So, in that sense, I'm glad that there are measures that we're taking these risks seriously. At the same time, these are problems that are going to get worse, not better, and so it's important that we take them seriously. I will say this: e-filing is kind of a scary thing for some people. Commissioner Roberts mentioned and we've heard a lot about it, the tax return that goes to the ceiling. That's not the most convenient way for a filer to file either. But I can tell you from personal experience that as soon as we start requiring people to file on an e-file basis, you're gonna have people that don't feel comfortable with that. So I just would throw out that as a word of caution. Other than that, I'm happy to move on.
All right. Thank you, Senator Johnson. A balance between customer service and security?
Thank you, Steve. Well, I don't think that customer service and security are mutually exclusive. In fact, I really think that customer service is very mission-driven. That's how I look at that. And so, how many times have we gone somewhere? I know it's happened to me. You go somewhere and customer service seems to be a punitive thing. The person that's giving you customer service almost seems to be in pain. I don't view it that way. So, yeah, it happens, but it's not. And so, you think about when you answer the phone, or if I get up here and say, well, I'm really happy to be here today, I should open the face up. I'm very happy to be here today, pleased. And we feel these things through the phones or however we engage the public, and the Tax Commission, I'm sure, has that same opportunities. So I'll give you just an example of what I think is one good example of customer service that involves security, and maybe a bad example. And these are personal experiences that I have had that involve financial instruments. So one of them is when I had a check drawn on the state of Idaho, signed by our good controller, and I went into a local banking institution and presented a valid government ID and was asked for a thumbprint signature. Well, I didn't want to give a thumbprint signature. I don't see a reason to give a thumbprint signature. And I was told that that was the policy of the bank. And so I thought, well, gosh, can I see a copy of the policy? And they couldn't find a copy of the policy. So to me, it just didn't seem real sincere or valid that kind of security, if you will, measure was really that necessary, especially the fact that I had a government-issued ID, the check was drawn on that bank, and it was made out to me. To me, that seemed pretty reasonable, okay? Another example is on my credit cards, I typically don't sign the back of my credit cards. I'll say, please see the ID or please ask for ID. And when I hand that to a merchant and they run it without checking my ID, I don't like that. I don't feel real secure. And in fact, I would prefer that they ask me for that ID. I would encourage them to do that. And then when they do, I always thank them, and I want to validate that kind of customer service, that kind of transaction, if you will. So I would encourage those kind of things. So maybe just two simple examples where I think customer service and security, again, are not mutually exclusive, but something where the Tax Commission can offer the same kind of service for its customers.
Thank you very much. Tanya, you come at it from a little bit of a different angle, being a tax preparer. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would echo the same sentiments that I don't think that they are mutually exclusive, but certainly security is part of customer service. If you are providing information to someone that is not the correct individual, I would say you're not providing either customer service or security. That being said, I've been part of a group that's worked with the AICPA at a national level, as well as some of the stuff Doreen was talking about. And we've heard a lot about what the IRS is doing with the IP PIN numbers and those kinds of things. And the IP PIN is an identity protection PIN number that a taxpayer can request and receive. Now, those PINs are both a good and a bad thing because it does allow, they're a brand new number every single year. The taxpayer gets it in December. They can't transact any business without the IP PIN. So if that's not on the return or they're not able to provide that number, the IRS will not work with you. However, some of the downsides are at a practitioner level. When those IP PINs are issued, we are completely restricted from working on the client's account electronically. It requires something by telephone or some very restrictive efforts to be able to have a conversation about this. We're not able to use the electronic e-services, for example. And there was a practitioner speaking in Washington, D.C., who was also a victim of identity theft. And he is locked out of his own account forever at this point because they don't allow those services. So that's an example of where security is trumping customer service. So I think it is critical to find that balance point.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Roberts?
Thank you, Steve. And it's good that we can hear from the elected officials and the professional community first, and they've heard from us for a while. But there's a couple things that come to mind for me as number one, a taxpayer myself, past legislator, policymaker, and now being asked to be an administrator of the tax. I've worn different hats, and I still wear some of those hats when it comes to running my own business. And I've been on one of the guys that called in over the years. So I've been that taxpayer that called in. And I think for me, there's a couple things that I think are important that we should tailor and fit into the tax commission's everyday procedures. One is our customer service should be timely. It should be something that we don't have to wait around for a long time for. And I'm proud to say now as administrator that our phone wait times are very, very short compared to other tax agencies. I think our customer service, to me, should have the word courteous embedded in it. It should be something that's courteous, keeping in mind that, number one, we work for, as an agency, we work for the taxpayers and the businesses who are calling in. Number three, I think our service should be accurate. In other words, it should give the right answer to the taxpayer. I think it should be consistent. I think if you have a question on sales and use tax on Friday, and you call in on next Friday, it ought to be the same answer unless the legislators passed a bill that is effective date between those 2 days. It ought to be consistent. I think it also ought to be fair. I think there are times when we have to administer a tax in a very fair level. And as Tanya pointed out, there's definitely a balance to be maintained in all of those aspects of, the timeliness, the courteous, the accurate, the consistency, and the fairness, and the security. I think you've seen today by the presentations we've had, security is becoming a very big deal. And I take my job, and I know Elliot does, and Tom does, and Rich does, we take our jobs very seriously when it comes to protecting taxpayers' personal information. And that's something that you want us to do. And so I think that security finding that balance between something that's so secure that you can't even function in it, that's not acceptable, but yet having very loose safeguards, that's not acceptable either. So, and I guess I might just say that 2 weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C. Tom Castellamides and I were at the Federation of Tax Administrators meeting in Washington, D.C., and we were standing behind Commissioner John Koskin from the IRS. And as they introduced and rolled out this program on a national level, and it got national coverage, but we're fortunate in Idaho that we're on the game as much as we are. There are some states that are not, and so we just don't ever want to go to the road or be in the place where criminals say, you know what, Idaho's got their guard down, let's play there.
Thank you. Commissioner Work?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm gonna come at this from a little bit of personal experience. For me, customer service should be equal and benefit every single taxpayer, regardless of who you are and what your level of sophistication is. If we receive a call from a very well-educated, highly trained CPA, that may be a different call than from a taxpayer that's just struggling with an issue that they have out there in the community somewhere. We should be able to both protect the security of the taxpayer's information, whether you're a third party calling in for a taxpayer or whether you're the taxpayer themselves, but we should also be able to answer your question. And from my perspective, because of personal experience, I'll tell you about my experience. I had a little issue with the IRS. It actually had to do with a while back about some twisted stuff that happened with campaign contributions getting associated with my personal income. I'm reasonably well educated. I took the time to call the IRS. I even visited the IRS office here. I went all over the place to try to take care of this problem, and I couldn't. I could not find a person at the IRS that would say, okay, let's figure the problem out and let's take care of it. Finally, out of desperation, I called my CPA, and my CPA had the problem resolved within like 5 hours, because they had some kind of line into the IRS they could call. I don't know, there's maybe a secret password there, a handshake that happens. But from my perspective, in Idaho, that shouldn't happen. If somebody has an issue, they should be able to call the tax commission. We verify their identification, and hopefully we do that in a very friendly manner. And the taxpayer understands why we're asking for the information we are, and then we proceed to figuring out what the problem is and how to solve that problem. That, to me, is the kind of customer service we should have every day for every call. And from the standpoint of security, there's going to be a balance between security procedure and customer service. When we find it, we'll let you know.
Thank you. Tanya, I'm going to ask you this first. And what, if any, improvements do you think could be made at the Tax Commission to provide better customer service?
Well, I think that they are in the process of taking some of those steps as they presented around the state. They discussed different efforts. The proposed adding the driver's license information might be a solution for some. I know that so I have some clients that would not want to provide that information. So again, there's that balance point. I think that the discussions that I've heard about if there's a way to speed up the processing of the W-2 information so that there is something to be matched against, that does seem like something that would help identify things that don't look quite right.
All right, thank you. Senator Johnson, can you think of anything that maybe could improve the customer service at the Tax Commission?
Steve, thank you. I honestly cannot. But I will tell you, though, working for the state in this Capitol here, though, we do have internal customer service. It might be a little bit different issue, but Certainly, if I were to call someone over at the tax commission and maybe identify myself as a state legislator, not that they give out confidential information, but certainly, the service that I get has always been very good, very timely, very responsive. And most of the time, I don't identify myself as a state legislator. I just say I'm Dan Johnson, and I'm asking for someone. And the service has been very good. So, yeah, thank you for that.
That was probably because you contacted the property tax division. Representative Anders, I want to change up the question just a little bit for you based on something that you said.
I just got it figured out.
Well, okay, go ahead and give me your answer, and then I have a question for you based on your earlier comment.
Okay, I'll make it short because it's actually not a whole lot different than Dan's answer. I don't want to get into the personal management styles of the commission. I will say I do think it's incredibly important to have the right focuses. And the items that I had identified are exactly the same items that Commissioner Roberts had talked about. So as long as you're focusing on improving those 4 or 5, tone, access, security, and consistency, I think that you'll be very successful.
What I was going to ask you was, you had mentioned when I was talking about the original question about the balance between security and customer service, that you felt security was embedded in the basics of our operation. Could you expound on that just for a minute or so?
Sure. When the state of Idaho tells a taxpayer, you have to do this, embedded in that you have to better be that the stuff that they're asking you to do is secure. I think that as a state, we owe the taxpayers of Idaho at least that. And so that's why I say it's embedded. Now there's degrees. Whatever we're doing today can always be more secure. We can always try for better. But at a certain basic level, there's an element of security that has to be in the back of the minds of taxpayers when they're dealing with the tax commission.
Commissioner?
So thank you, Mr. Moderator, Steve.
You're welcome.
I want to respond a little bit to a comment that Tanya made about W-2 filings. Currently in the state of Idaho, our filing deadline is February. Need some help. Last day of February. So those of you that may file your taxes early, if you want to have a refund, you're probably going to be dropping that filing in January as soon as you can, so you can get the refund check. We process the return. It would really be nice if we had a W-2 already in the system that would be the standard bearer for that refund. Okay? So, take advantage of the opportunities that lie before you. We happen to have a piece of legislation this year that will move the filing date for W-2s, and I'm looking at the comptroller over here, to January 31st. For the one reason, to get that data into our system first so we have something to compare when a return is filed. Without that W-2 in our system, we're going on the full faith and credit of that form as being accurate. It'd be really nice to have the employer's side of it so it could match up. And that's a piece of legislation we'll be bringing this year to help as one of the tools for verifying fraud.
Thank you. Does anyone from the audience have any questions, either written or come up to the microphone for the panelists or Doreen or Commissioner Katsoulias? I'm sorry, I can't read this last word. E-file, okay, thank you. Why has Idaho, I think this is for the two commissioners, why has Idaho chosen not to join other states which do not charge to e-file? Familiar with that?
I don't know that we charge. Now, let me see if I can speculate here for just a moment, because if you use, and I don't know if I can use brand names or not, but if you use tax prepared software that you can find online, some of the more popular ones, generally it's free until you file on the state level, and then they charge you for the state. Now, there are a couple states in the country that have passed legislation that says if you're going to use this type of software, they charge one rate, and it includes both the federal and the state filing. In Idaho, we do not have that legislation, and therefore some of the more popular brand name softwares for tax preparation will provide a low-cost federal filing, but then turn around and charge for a state filing. And see, I'm getting a nod, so I think I've answered that correctly. So that may be what you're referring to, but as far as filing with the state tax commission, there's no charge on our side that I'm aware of. Doreen? Oh, Doreen, why don't you come up and explain that? See, you get the commissioners for a knowledge level about this deep, and when it comes to something particular depth, we got to get the experts up here. Doreen?
So Idaho also participates in the National Free File Alliance, where we've done our studies with our taxpayer base that we have here in Idaho, and the majority, or a good portion of Idaho taxpayers, would actually qualify for the free filing. The best thing to encourage people to do is to go to our website under that free filing to go to the right software packages, because if they go through the federal free filing, they may not get the state benefit of that free state return.
Tanya?
Thank you. I was just going to add that sometimes there may be a fee associated for somebody that's using a paid preparer. They're passing along a fee. Well, that is possibly because the practitioner hasn't paid for all of the 50 states. They've just paid for Idaho or just paid for some other ones. So if, for example, a taxpayer was using a practitioner based out of Arizona, and that practitioner was saying, well, for Idaho, you have to pay an additional fee, that might just be a software licensing fee that they are passing along, as opposed to a fee for the electronic filing process.
Right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, how are we on time, Renee? Is Tom wrapping it up, or we have time for another question or comment? Well, I can always come up with a question.
One quick comment, Steve. And this is just, again, relaying a little bit of personal experience. For those of you who wonder what might be the easiest way to keep from having something like what I went through happen to you, I'm a huge procrastinator when it comes to doing my taxes. So I was always a April 15th at 10 o'clock at night filer, and that's what got me. So the idea of waiting to the last minute to file isn't necessarily the smartest thing in the world, and so I'm lucky that it was caught, but get them turned in before somebody else turns one in that looks like you. So,
Just as a comment, this is one of those cases where filing early and often, leave the often off, just file early is really important, because a lot of these cases, as Representative Anders has mentioned, this first showed up last year in Utah, the state of Utah, and it was actually a tax commission, Utah State Tax Commission employee who first noticed that somebody had filed on his or her behalf in their system, and he or she had not yet filed. And so the lights went off and said, gosh, somebody filed my return for me, and it wasn't me. And nationwide, you heard about it in the news, multiple states. In fact, multiple states shut down their refund process because of that issue. So anyway, those are just some things that happened, and there was millions of records compromised in that data breach.
Yeah, and just a little additional information. They're not positive, but it looks as though the identity theft happened from the first time I e-filed was 3 years ago. And it was a TurboTax. I'll say the name. I don't know if that's a problem or not. I don't. But anyway, it was, and they had the data breach. So that's why there's a little bit of hesitation on the e-filing. But I don't know how we're ever going to get past that. I've talked to a lot of different CPAs, and I know the benefits to the tax commission as far as filing is concerned. But I don't know that we fully understand yet how pervasive the problem is or could be and where the weak spots are. So anyway.
Commissioner?
Well, I do want to add, with just the sheer volume of data breaches that we've seen and the number of records of U.S. citizens that we've seen, everybody in this audience and your friends and your family can pretty much be guaranteed that your identity is in the wrong hands at this point. The real question is whether or not your identity will be utilized by somebody for some nefarious purpose. And so, when we think about it in those terms, you can see what the tax commission is facing in terms of the potential for fraud, identity theft fraud, to ramp up dramatically. And we've seen that. Doreen presented the numbers from 14 to 15. We're hopeful that we won't see another dramatic ramp up in 16. But as our budget request indicates, we want to have personnel on board to make sure that we're capable of handling whatever we see, and in addition, getting all our other work done. So be careful out there. Be really careful out there, and wear your seatbelts.
Real short comment, Commissioner.
Just one last thing I want to say is, and this is in balance, of course, with Representative Anders. Remember that 800,000 individual income tax returns? About 80% of those today in Idaho are filed electronically. I believe that's the number. And that's been building over the years and probably will continue to grow. That's 640,000 returns that are processed electronically. If for some reason we stop that and everybody filed paper, we're going to come talk to DFM and to the governor's office because we're going to need a bigger building. We're going to need a lot more employees to process those returns. So there is a balance to be struck here somehow. And I think as citizens of the United States and really citizens of every country are going through this process, there's a learning curve, and we're learning how to deal with the problems at hand and trying to figure out that balance that is, number one, acceptable to taxpayers to get their information filed. But we invite you to be part of that as we learn this process, and we're doing our level best.
Tanya, very quick comment.
All right, last comment is there's hope out there.
Yeah, happy holidays.
I've heard it referred to as the dark net, the data that's out there that they already have. It's just a question of when and how they're going to use it. And I just would really encourage everybody to be monitoring your credit reports, checking that. That is how you're going to know that something's been compromised. And you need to not only, I caution you, do not just only check your credit cards. Make sure the bank accounts that are shown are really yours, because those fraudsters are smart. They open a bank account in your name so that they can get the direct deposit into an account with your name on it. You need to make sure that those bank accounts are really real too.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, panelists. Did a great job, and Representative Andhurst, I appreciate you bringing that up about the last minute thing. That's been one of Doreen's mantras for years, is don't wait the last minute, get them done early, and so we appreciate that. But as you can see, our hallmark is security and service, and that's what we preach, and that's what we're going to practice for the next many years, and we have been practicing. I did want to end with one final comment, information-wise, and that pertains to the legislators. And I think Ken Roberts was on Rev and Tax for 12 years, plenty of time to have learned. And he for 3 years there, he's been with us at the Tax Commission. And for the first 2 years, monthly, he'd have this comment when sales tax issues or income tax issues came up, and he'd say, "I just wish I'd have known what I know now when I voted for that bill." Because it really does have a major effect on on taxes in the state of Idaho. And, you know, taxes affect everybody in some way throughout the state of Idaho, and we do our best to promote security and service, and we'll continue to do that. Further questions, comments, concerns? If not, we'll stand adjourned.
Welcome to Idaho in Session. Idaho in Session is sponsored by Don't Fail Idaho, the Idaho State Broadcasters Association, Union Pacific, with additional support from the Idaho Association of Counties, the Association of Idaho Cities, the Idaho Cable Telecommunications Association, and the Idaho Public Television Endowment.